Hello BookTube. To celebrate having 1,000 books in my collection, I put out a call for Q&A questions. Um, so over the past few weeks, commenters on that particular Q&A call video have asked me questions. So today I'm going to be doing the answers for them. First is Jim of Jim's Books, Reading and Stuff. His question is, in your 1,000 books, do you have any cookbooks? Yes, I have 10 cookbooks. So about 1% of my collection are cookbooks. They're a contested part of my collection, much as the art books I have, because they tend to be, you use them in a way, they're instructional. And I haven't always been the most regular in using them. I mean, the art books more so than the cookbooks. I've been using the cookbooks quite a bit lately. Just today I made a brownie recipe from the Big Yellow Gourmet Cookbook edited by Ruth Reichl. And I've made this brownie recipe a few times and it is phenomenal. I've also been making a muffin recipe from the Cooking for Two cookbook that Cooks Illustrated or America's Test Kitchen put out. So, yeah. Uh, but then there are some cookbooks I have that I don't really use a whole lot, which I probably should before I add any more. Which is a whole nother thing because I was thinking of adding some more cookbooks to my collection over the next few months. I've been wanting to expand my cookbook collection, but I haven't gotten around to it because there are other books that have claimed my attention to add to the collection. And sometimes I'm not entirely sure if I would actually like the recipes presented in the cookbook, because I was thinking of actually picking one up, or I had one pre-ordered for yesterday, but I decided to change my mind and went with a different book. And I'll talk a bit about that tomorrow when I do my March book haul. Anthony Hodges says, here's to the next 1,000. Thank you. And he has a few questions. Have you been a lifelong bookworm? Yes, I've been a bookworm for as long as I can remember. When I was younger, in elementary school and maybe a little bit of middle school, I wasn't as much of a bookworm as I've since become later in middle school and into pretty much the rest of my life. I would play video games and play with toys and stuff like that, but books have always been a very important part of my life. I really can't remember a time when I wasn't a heavy reader. Question number 2. Which books do you remember the most from your teenage years? I would say what is that? Well, I guess that doesn't count since I can't remember it right now. Mysterious Skin by Scott Heim. It's a gay novel from the mid-90s that's about two young men who overcome or deal with being sexually abused by their Little League coach when they were younger, and how both young men sort of process it in very different ways. It's a very brutal book that I read when I was I think I was a senior when I read it, and it blew me away. Although coming back to it a few years later, I'm a bit more skeptical of it now. Also, The House Again by Nadine Gordimer. I quite enjoyed that one. It's one of her post-apartheid novels. It's very complicated and difficult to read. but I quite enjoyed it. It's about a young man who kills his girlfriend and his girlfriend's lover and his parents and their black South African lawyer. It's very powerful. Also, I think maybe The Moon by Armistead Maupin I quite enjoyed when I was a teen. The Rat by Günter Grass, which is a very complicated fairy tale retelling. Also, the Tamuli and the Elenium trilogies by David Eddings, I quite remember, and a whole slew of Conan pastiche novels, mainly Conan the Hero, which you can also call Conan in Vietnam because it's very heavily inspired by Vietnam. Question number 3. Which books have made a profound impact on you? I would go with, sorry about that. I would go with Perdido Street Station by China Miéville. It's a seminal work in the New Weird, which is a weird mashup of fantasy, science fiction, and all sorts of science fiction and fantasy genres that I read in 2006, and it blew me away, and to such an extent that the kind of fantasy that I want to write is very, very inspired by China Miéville. Also, Big Wonderful Thing by Stephen Harrigan. That completely sort of opened my eyes to history. I started 2020 with all of my nonfiction being on these two shelves right here. Maybe this whole bookcase. But after Big Wonderful Thing, my history collection has exploded to this whole shelf, the one under it, most of this one right here, and we'll soon be taking over this one, meaning the rest of the nonfiction will have to find a new home. I'll go with those two. Also a whole slew of other things, but those two really are the ones that really had a profound impact on me. Question number 4. Which genre books are a no-go zone for you? I would say romance. Not necessarily for snobbish reasons, but because I've never gotten into them, and I've tried a few. I think in 2020, Sarah of the Bookish Knitter had a reading project where people would read romances and try to get into it, because this corner of BookTube is, for the most part, more literary fiction or realistic fiction, however you want to define it. Although a lot of us do have genre interests outside of literary fiction or even focus on nonfiction. But, excuse me, but I decided to participate, and so I tried Denim and Diamonds by Debbie Macomber. It's about a young woman who leaves her small town to become a singer in Los Angeles, and her leaving her boyfriend, who was I guess content to live on the family ranch. And then eventually she returns and they kind of hook back together, and I read the prologue and maybe part of the first chapter, and I just was incensed. I'm like, ugh. Why anybody would want to date the male love interest in this book, I have no idea. He is such a douche. A complete and total douche. So I built on that one, and then I tried Love Lessons by Heidi Cullinan. It's a gay romance about a promiscuous upperclassman who has to, his living arrangements have been upended, so he has to move back on campus, and he agrees to room with a young, an incoming freshman who has a slew of allergies, and they hit it off as friends and then later become lovers. And I mean, it was cutesy, but it just didn't do anything for me. And the other romances I've tried since really haven't done anything for me. So, I mean, maybe one of these days it will, but for now I don't think so. I could also argue for horror. Although I mean, a lot of particularly early science fiction and fantasy have a lot of horror elements to it. I mean, there's a period where some science fiction, fantasy, and horror were sort of a combined genre that sort of spun off. But thinking about like horror proper really hasn't done anything for me. I mean, if you could say it's like more science fiction or more fantasy, I'm kind of more into it. But I think it'd be definitely more romance is a no-go genre. Also, in the realm of nonfiction, I would go with position paper books. Those are just horrible. Horrible. I'm still traumatized by Charged. How that made it past the first round of the BookTube Prize, I don't know. But anyway, moving on to question number 5. Favorite book either about or set in Texas? Of course, there's A Big Wonderful Thing by Stephen Harrigan. It's a history of Texas. There's also God Save Texas by Lawrence Wright, which is a political book that kind of looks at contemporary Texas. It is amazing. As far as fiction's concerned, I really haven't found a whole lot of fiction set in Texas, which is a big bummer. Part of the reason why I constantly try to get into Alamo House by Sarah Bird is because it's one of the few novels I have that is set in Texas, and I don't really quite get on with it. Although, so yeah. So, nonfiction, a bit more favorite books set in Texas. Nonfiction, I mean, you know, fiction, not so much. Anyway, question number 6. Which Agatha Christie books would you recommend to someone who hasn't read any of her work? I would go with probably her best work, which I would argue is And Then There Were None. I think it's a good place to start. If you want to get into like her detectives, for Poirot, Murder of Roger Ackroyd, Murder on the Orient Express, Death on the Nile is great. For Miss Marple, The Body in the Library, I think is really good. I think the Marple books are consistently rather good, so you could start anywhere. Even say Murder at the Vicarage, although maybe not say They Do It with Mirrors or 450 from Paddington or Caribbean Mystery. I'm not particularly fond of those 3 as much as the others. I would avoid like her later work, the stuff that came out in say the 60s, 70s, except for maybe the Miss Marple. Those are pretty good throughout, except, I mean, I'm not as fond of some of them, but anyway. And question number 7. Who are your favorite British authors besides Agatha Christie? China Miéville, I really like. Kieran Gillen, he's a comic book writer. He's wonderful. Philip Larkin, quite like him. Kenneth Lee, although sometimes I think I like the idea of her work more than her work itself. Yeah, I think those would be my favorite. And a few others too. those were the questions from Anthony Hodges. Let's move on to Dave S. Who says, fantastic, congratulations on your collection. Thank you. And his barrage of questions. When did you start your collection? So the collection as it is right now has its roots in high school, with the oldest book being Mysterious Skin and Dream Boys by Jim Grimsley. That's the book that I was blanking on. Being in Dancer from the Dance and The Spell by Alan Hollinghurst. Being the kind of like the core of what my collection is now. It's pretty much I've built on it from then. Although I've added some books I had at the time that I've since gotten rid of. Although a lot of the books I've had before then, like as a child, early teen, I haven't really re-added in those formats. I mean, I do have like some Agatha Christie, which I had previously when I was a preteen and very early teen. So, but the core of my collection, like the kernel that sort of remains, is from my high school years. What is the book you've had the longest? Either it's a toss-up again between Mysterious Skin, Dream Boys, Dancer from the Dance, The Spell. One of those four are the ones I've had the longest continuously. I mean, I've re-added some, like some of the Agatha Christie's, and H. Rider Haggard, but those don't really count because they're different editions and I had gotten rid of them previously. How do you select the books that you acquire? Like I said yesterday in the acquiring books tag, it's usually whatever themes or subjects or desires I have at any given point in time. Recently, I've been on a nostalgia kick, I would say. I've been wanting to beef up my poetry collection, so I've been picking up a lot of, particularly this past month, a lot of contemporary poetry. I've also been wanting to pick up a lot more literary fiction, which will be a rant for Friday, which I'm thinking I'm kind of coming out of that, which 2 weeks of bailing on literary fiction will do that for you. Also, I've been obsessed with manga lately. I've been kind of adding more and more manga, which we'll feature tomorrow too. And of course, for the past year or more like 2 years, I've been expanding my history collection like nobody's business. Again, my history books were rarely this, plus other nonfiction, but it's expanded to pretty much 2 whole shelves. It's the second largest part of my collection. I mean, science fiction and fantasy are still the largest part, even though I haven't really added much to them in a year or two. Do you have any Holy Grail finds, books that you longed to own but had a hard time finding? Yes, there's a number. Going back to Jim's question of the cookbooks, I had when I was in college, The Glorious Foods of Greece by Diane Kokkilas. I was a part of one of those book clubs, and one of them was focused on cookbooks. And even though I've never really made much use of it, I loved the cookbook, and I'd gotten rid of it, and it took me years to find a new copy of it. And when I did, I picked it up. Also, The History of the Hittites by Trevor Bryce and The Society of the Hittites. Both have been Holy Grail books for me. Currently, books that are kind of in that Holy Grail category, I want The Last Medieval Queens by J.L. Lanesmith. It's a wonderful history that looks at Margaret of Anjou, Elizabeth Woodville, and Neville, and Elizabeth of York. And I want that book so badly, but I've never found an affordable copy. And also a ton of manga that I really want, particularly Magi, the Labyrinth of Magic, Volume 8. I cannot find that volume anywhere. So, also some of the ones after that, but yeah, there are quite a few Holy Grails I want. Are there any title you are desiring to own but haven't been able to add to your collection yet? Oh, so yeah, again, The Last Medieval Queens, the Magi, the Labyrinth of Magic, Volume 8, also, and a number of like the kind of volumes there too, because I think Magi is kind of out of print or something. I don't know what's going on with it. And also, probably, even though I've finished it off, but like Tsubasa Volume 22 and 26 through 28, and the Del Rey manga editions. Yeah, so there are quite a few that I want, that I'm having a hard time finding. Are there any titles you're desiring to own? Oh, okay, that was repeating. Okay. Of the 1,000 books you own, what are your must-keep, never part with top titles? I would go with Big Wonderful Thing, Post Wall, Post Square, the Boss Log novels. I think the manga I've added. So the Fairy Tale, Taliban Hanako-kun, Magi, the Labyrinth of Magic, Tsubasa, Eden Zero, Full Metal Alchemist. Yeah, I think those would be the ones off the top of my head, although there are probably quite a few. I do tend to have this tendency of regretting getting rid of some of the books I have gotten rid of in the past and have wanted to reacquire them. Again, The Glorious Fruits of Greece is a wonderful example of that. Are there any books in your collection that you knew nothing of before acquiring that completely surprised you at how good they are once you read them? Oh yes, Post Wall, Post Square by Christina Spohr is an amazing history of the end of the Cold War that has not gotten the attention it deserves. Post Wall, I already said that. Big Wonderful Thing was amazing. Also, Charming Billy by Alice McDermott. I was shocked by how much I enjoyed it the first time I read it. Yeah, quite a few. Moving on to Bill Rutenberg. He says, "Hey James, congratulations on building up your collection to 1,000 books." Thank you. His question is, what is your favorite book out of the 1,000 books you own? What books do you still want to add to your collection? So, currently my favorite is Big Wonderful Thing by Stephen Harrigan. It is a phenomenal history of Texas. It's history how it should be done. It was a delight to read. I loved every moment of it. And it really kick-started a renewed love of history. My history collection has exploded since then, and it's just wonderful. Another close contender, I think, would be Taliban Hanako-kun Volume 3 by Ida Iro. Taliban Hanako-kun is a manga about a young girl. She's the equivalent of a high school freshman who goes to one of the most haunted schools in Japan. One day she learns that if you perform a certain ritual at a certain stall in the girl's bathroom, that the ghost Hanako-san will grant a wish. She performs the ritual, And instead of Hanako-san being a girl, which the ghost traditionally is, this version of Hanako-san is a young boy who kind of grants her wish, and then that gets her into trouble. So he helps her out of it, and they form a friendship. Joining them is a young exorcist in training named Ko, who initially tries to exorcise Hanako-kun, and then they sort of make a friendship. In Volume 3, it looks a bit at Hanako-kun's history, his life before he was a ghost, and that kind of arc with the 4 p.m. book stacks is amazing. And then there's a short arc where Hanako is threatened by Ku's older brother Teru, who is an exorcist himself, and Ko's defense of Hanako is just an amazing read. I loved it, and I really want to experience more of Toilet Bound Hanako-kun. So the second question is, what books do you still want to add to your collection? Sticking with the manga, I want to collect all of Toilet Bound Hanako-kun, all of Eden Zero, all of Fairy Tail, Fullmetal Alchemist, a whole bunch. Also, again, Last Medieval Queens by J.L. Lane-Smith. I want to complete the Hittite trilogy by Trevor Bryce. Also want to kind of pick up some more science fiction and fantasy, although I kind of do need to be a bit more mindful about them and a bit more intentional. There's one, I think it's The Bone Orchard. I think that sounds really good. The Moon Goddess's Daughter. So I think it sounds really interesting too. Also upcoming, there's The Persians from Basic Books that I really want. The Settled Land or Unsettled Land, which is a history of the Texas Revolution, and a host of other books. There's a lot. My wish lists are immense. It's like, yeah. Anyway, so that was my 1000 Books Q&A. Thank you, Bill, Dave, Anthony, and Jim for asking questions. And yeah, so here's on to the next 1000. So until I see you tomorrow, BookTube, with my March book haul. Thank you, have a great afternoon, and stay safe.